Today is October 13th, 2025. My name is Rob Carr of Kalamazoo Right to Life, and this is Pro-Life Week. Well, happy Columbus Day to all of you from 1492. Today might be a little bit of a different program, and I may have to apologize for that if you're expecting something different. But yesterday I was looking at the MSNBC website, and there was an article by a law professor from California named Mary Ziegler. And I'm familiar with her. She's written several books on abortion, on Roe v. Wade. And she's quite a competent scholar. But she is very pro-choice, So I know going into this article that she's going to be approaching the issue as a zealot or as an ideologue defending abortion rights. So she begins the article talking about the Republican senators, all of them except two, drafted a letter to Robert Kennedy Jr., Secretary of DHS, basically asking him to put a halt or a stop on the abortion pill mifepristone and how doctors can prescribe it using telemedicine. You go online, you talk to a doctor on a screen, and he can get you your prescription rather than going into his office in person, face-to-face discussion with your physician. And actually, the doctor online, most likely he's not your doctor at all. He's some guy at a clinic that is going to be giving out pills to people all over the country. So I'm looking at her article, and she has made some statements here. I admittedly I am not a scholar. I don't have a PhD in American history, so my knowledge is limited too. But I have read quite a bit on the issue of abortion history, and not necessarily the history of Roe v. Wade, but on the history of abortion. And actually, a great book as a resource is this book, Abortion Rights, by Marvin Olasky, who was formerly the publisher and editor of World Magazine. This is a great book. A lot of primary sources, a lot of documents here to adequately defend his position about the history of abortion. So the first thing that Mary Ziegler says that I challenge is this statement, quote, "Abortion appeared to be common when states criminalized the procedure throughout pregnancy in the 19th century." Well, first of all, there's a certain level of a nuanced answer here that she doesn't really tell you, and that is abortion was never the method of choice on getting rid of unplanned pregnancies. Now, going back to this Olasky book, he states that during the colonial era, about 1 or 2% of all babies were born illegitimate, out of wedlock. Now, it may be true that a lot of babies were conceived prior to marriage. But in that colonial period, 99% of all women who were expecting an out-of-wedlock baby, they got married by the time the delivery came around, except for like that 1% that actually had out-of-wedlock births. So if you had a baby that you didn't want, how are you going to get rid of it? Well, see, today's worldview, they're thinking, well, they would have had an abortion. And that really is not true. The vast majority of women who got rid of their unplanned, their unwanted child, I should say, was through three methods. Number one, the most common was infanticide. You deliver your baby and you kill it. The second method was abandonment. You have your baby, you go off into the woods, and you leave the baby there to die of neglect. Or 3, concealment, similar to the second one. You have your baby, you've concealed your pregnancy. You have your baby, and you leave it, and it dies of neglect. Those were the primary reasons that women got rid of their unwanted babies in the colonial period. And that really changed in the 1830s and 1840s. And some of these pro-life doctors of that pre-Civil War period were looking at this rise of women who are having abortion-related complications. And actually, before I go any further, prior to 1880, almost all abortions were done by the use of pills or potions or creams, something that was given to the woman and she would expel that baby. After 1880, surgical abortions became the norm and the most common method. See, prior to 1880, these surgical instruments were unsterilized, they were unsafe, and a woman who had a surgical abortion in, let's say, 1860, there's a very good chance she died by perforated uteruses or complications or hemorrhaging or excessive bleeding. Just, it was very dangerous. So the method of choice were these creams and potions. They were given by irregular doctors, quacks, some midwives, in an unregulated business. And so you had these unregulated doctors coming to the fore in the 1830s and 1840s. And this was also the time when America was experiencing a different, some social changes. Americans were beginning to see more immigrants, primarily from Germany and from Ireland. Prior to 1830, let's say, most Americans were descended from their British or Scottish or German, whether Mennonite or Amish ancestors from the colonial period, the Mayflower and Jamestown and things like that. So pre-Revolutionary War descendants. Now we're into the 1830s. Now we're seeing more immigrants who were, not all, but many were poor, and they had disadvantages when it came to employment, especially in big cities like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Pittsburgh. Just big cities had major problems. You had gangs, you had prostitution, you had crime, you had things that happened that you weren't seeing as much in 1750. Now you're seeing a lot of it in 1850. And the rise of prostitution was a big issue. And Marvin Olasky, in this book, Abortion Rights, using primary documents, he has concluded through evidence that about 60,000 women were prostitutes in America's big cities prior to the Civil War. And in an area that you didn't have birth control pills or any kind of contraceptives, women had large families. We all know about that, big families. And prostitutes sometimes were getting pregnant 2 or 3 times a year by their clients. And if they want to, continue to ply their trade, they couldn't be pregnant. So they had abortions on a regular basis. So Olasky estimates that about 120 to 150,000 abortions were performed in America in that pre-Civil War period, so before 1860. And it was also at this time, around 1860, that a lot of America's doctors began to see the rise of illegal abortion and what it was doing to America's women And they formed in 1859 the Physicians' Crusade Against Abortion. And this group of doctors would pressure state legislators to pass pro-life laws. And if the state, there may have already been a pro-life law, but they were determined to make the law more pro-life. So if there was a state that had a law that said you can't have an abortion at quickening or beyond quickening, the new law might say you can't have an abortion before quickening. And one of the reasons is the doctors in the 1850s, 1860s began to understand more clearly the process of human reproduction. And it was by scientific discoveries that these doctors were saying now 1850 or 1860, that the unborn baby in the womb is a human being from the moment of conception, not at viability, not at quickening, but it was at conception. So these states were changing their laws to outlaw abortion throughout all stages of pregnancy. So this kind of leads me to the second statement that Mary Ziegler said. The new state criminal laws allowed physicians to intervene to protect the life of the mother. Well, here again, it's only it's an incomplete or a partial answer. These state laws that were being passed between 1860 and 1880, almost all of them were laws to protect, yes, the life of the mother, but they were passed to protect the life of the unborn child, because the baby in the womb was a human being, was human from the moment of conception. Now, I forgot something I just want to mention now. In Roe v. Wade, this kind of goes back to the first issue about infanticide and abortion in the colonial era that didn't exist hardly at all. In Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court said that abortion was a fundamental right, quote, deeply rooted in our history and tradition and essential to our nation's scheme of ordered liberty. Deeply rooted in our nation, in our history and tradition. Well, what I've said earlier is the truth. Abortion was not deeply rooted. If anything, you could argue that infanticide was more deeply rooted. And if you look at countries all over the world, France, Germany, England, Italy, China, Japan, all over the world, infanticide was the primary method of getting rid of unwanted babies. Infanticide. It was not abortion. It was not abortion. Abortion was not deeply rooted in our history, in our tradition. It was not. So Mary Ziegler, but she's only parroting what other pro-abortion scholars have said in the past. She's not necessarily doing independent research on that. She's quoting from other scholars who have been misled themselves. Okay, so the issue here again about the life of the mother, No, it was the life of the mother and the life of the unborn baby. And if Americans today, they read these statements by these scholars and they automatically think, well, she ought to know because she's a professor. Well, she may not have all her facts accurate. And the American public needs to know the truth that beginning around in the late 1850s, doctors, almost overwhelmingly, doctors in America were saying that abortion was a criminal act of taking an intentional act of taking the life of an unborn child. It was murder. And that the goal of these pro-life laws in the 1860s, 1880s was to protect the mother and the baby, a human life. With that, I'll let you go, and I'll see you next time.